Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us once again. We'll be back in Ecclesiastes tonight. It might be the last time for just a little bit as we move into towards the end of November with Thanksgiving coming up, and then Christmas. There's a lot of canceled Sunday night services. I always hate to do that because what happens is everyone gets out of the habit, and it's that much harder to go back to it. But we will be in Ecclesiastes again tonight. And hopefully we're actually going to cover this entire chapter this evening, Ecclesiastes chapter 8. I feel like maybe I'm not doing it justice because not only are we going to cover the entire chapter, we're going to do it in a very short amount of time. We're not going to spend a long time tonight in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 because we have a business meeting afterwards. Probably that's a little bit of a surprise that we'd cover the entire chapter all at one shot, as we've really taken a snail's pace when we've been studying here through Ecclesiastes. Last time we were together in this book, you might have remember, we saw in chapter 7 that even the wisest man who ever lived couldn't untangle all of the mysteries of life. Sometimes the righteous suffer, sometimes the wicked prosper, and sometimes our best laid plans unravel, don't they? So you might remember from our last time together, there were 6 vital lessons for those confusing moments of life. Number 1, from chapter 7, at the end of it really, we saw that we should trust God when life seems unfair. We should trust God when life seems unfair, and it will seem unfair. You know, when we're kids, we were focused on that, right? It's not fair. She got candy and I didn't. Well, sometimes when you're an adult, sometimes it feels like life is unfair, you know. Why should I get a flat tire? I was on my way to help someone. I remember one time I was down in Griffin, and I had no idea that these school zone cameras have different times on the different school zones, so like broadly different times. So I'm thinking, hey, it's like 5:30, like there's no way this is still a school zone. I mean, I can't read that tiny print driving past. I was on my way to help an elderly woman who needed me to help her get out of bed so that she could go have her needs taken care of. Her daughter would take care of her, and then I would carry her back and put her back in her bed. So I was doing a good thing. Minding my own business, drove down there, drove home, and a few weeks later, I get a ticket in the mail. You owe us $85 for speeding in the school zone or whatever it was. I'm like, what in the world? Like, you can't, win. Sometimes life seems unfair. Well, we have to learn, we have to recognize that we have to avoid extremes in life. We have to avoid the extreme of pride and the extreme of rebellion. We have to draw strength from godly wisdom. Remember that no one is perfect. We have to learn how to handle criticism wisely. Some of us would do well to take criticism more seriously, more carefully. It's natural for us to push back against it, but sometimes there's something to learn there. We have to learn to accept the limits of our understanding. And in short, really, Solomon was reminding us that true wisdom begins with humility before God. That's where chapter 8 is going next. Solomon moves from this question, how do I live wisely when life doesn't make sense, to how do I live humbly when life is beyond my control? Because the truth of the matter is, wisdom without humility becomes pride. And pride is what makes us restless when we can't explain or change or control what God allows. So in Ecclesiastes 8, Solomon's going to give us, this is for tonight, 5 identifying marks of a truly humble person. 5 identifying marks of a truly humble person. 5 ways humility shows itself when life doesn't go our way. And I'll just give these to you up front. We have recognizing what you don't understand, in verse 1. Recognizing what you don't understand. Learning to live with what you don't like. And I didn't realize, I guess I jumped straight to my slides on, so I will just read these to you, and then if you don't get them, you can get them off the slides as we go. So recognizing what you don't understand, learning to live with what you don't like. Number 3, accepting what can't be changed, accepting what can't be changed. Number 4, enjoying what can't be explained. And number 5, finding what you can't uncover. These marks don't just describe a humble life, they describe a life that's at peace with God's sovereignty, because humility doesn't demand answers from God, it rests in the God who holds the answers. So let's look down at our Bibles. We'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and we'll read the chapter together. There's just 17 verses. We'll read the entire chapter. Hopefully we'll cover all 17 verses tonight. Beginning there in verse 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 8, the Bible says, "Who is as the wise man? And who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment, and that in regard of the oath of God. Be not hasty to go out of his sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever please him. Where the word of a king is, there is power, and who may say unto him, What doest thou? Whoso," verse 5, "keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Because to every purpose there is a time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. For he knoweth not that which shall be, for who can tell him when it shall be? There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death. There is no discharge in that war, neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. All this I have seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. So I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. But it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he feareth not before God. There is a vanity which is done upon the earth, that there be just men unto whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. Again, there be wicked men to whom it happeneth according to the work of the righteous. And I said that this also is vanity. Then I commended mirth, because a man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and drink and be merry, for that shall abide with him of his labor the days of his life, which God giveth him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to see the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes, and beheld all the work of God, that a man can find out the work that is done under the sun. Because though a man labor to seek it out, he shall not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, he shall not be able to find it." Verse 1 there, recognizing what you don't understand, look back at verse 1. "Who is as the wise man? Who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed." Solomon is reminding us that true wisdom starts with reverence before God, knowing that you don't have all of the answers. The humble person doesn't pretend to understand everything. He recognizes the limits of his understanding and defers to God's wisdom. Proverbs warns us repeatedly that we shouldn't be wise in our own eyes. Isaiah 5:21, "Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes." Solomon says a man's wisdom, it says, makes his face to shine. So genuine wisdom softens, it humbles a person. I always think about like a grandfatherly face. When I was a kid, I'd look around at the people around me, and there were just certain people, usually older men and women of the faith, and their face just seemed very kind and pleasant, and I was drawn to it as a child. I think maybe that's what Solomon's referring to here. That genuine wisdom softens and humbles a person, and other people can see it. This person knows how much he doesn't know, because he knows who he does know. Paul wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, if any man thinketh he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. I read, and I was curious what the accurate numbers today are. This was in the early 2000s. Researchers were saying that the world's knowledge base was replaced every 38 years. Every 38 years, all the knowledge in the world, the knowledge base was replaced. I don't know how to exactly understand that, but when I looked into that today with advances in technology, with the internet, with AI, and all of these other things, they say that happens roughly every 12 to 13 months. What does that tell us? A human understanding is constantly shifting, but God's wisdom is never changing. And Solomon says, who really understands it all? And the answer is only God. Only God. I remember as a kid, seeing adults in my life and thinking, wow, they really understand life and know how things work, and like they're really smart and they must never, wonder what to do next. Now I'm an adult, I'm like, wow, nobody has got a clue what's going on in the world, right? It's crazy. Solomon says nobody understands it, only God. So humility starts with recognizing our limits. You have to, you don't need to know everything to be able to trust God. You just have to know God. You don't need to know everything to trust God. You just need to know God because He knows everything. I think about with children. They don't have to understand every rule that a father or a mother makes, a loving father or mother makes, to obey it. And they have to learn to obey even when they don't understand. There are times when your children will not understand why you're telling them to do something. But they have to learn to obey and to trust you because you love them. You have their best interests at heart. And so it is with our Heavenly Father. A believer doesn't have to have an explanation for everything in life when you trust the sovereign Lord. So recognizing what you don't understand in life, and then learning to live with what you don't like. Learning to live with what you don't like. I counsel thee, verses 2 through 7, I'm just reading some excerpts here. Counsel thee to keep the king's commandment. And of course, Solomon's going to say that. He's a king, right? But the Bible says, you ought to obey those who are in authority over you. It does say that. Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing. Well, guess what? You won't be punished if you don't break the law. You won't be punished if you don't break the law, generally speaking. A wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment, because to every purpose there is a time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him, for he knoweth not that which shall be. For who can tell him when it shall be? And Solomon's saying that life under authority, sometimes, obeying rulers, enduring injustice, facing uncertainty. In other words, he's saying living with what we don't like. Sometimes you don't like the law. Some of you don't like to use your seatbelt, but that's what the law says you ought to do. Some of you, like me, don't enjoy driving through construction zones in North Carolina where the speed limit says 55. There's not a soul out there working, and they haven't been working for months, and you're just like, what is the deal? And everyone's just, in traffic because they've got a project that's stalled. Sometimes you have to endure injustice in this life. No one likes injustice. Perhaps there's nothing we dislike more than injustice or perceived injustice. I don't know about you, but I don't like uncertainty. I don't like not knowing about the future. We have to learn to live with what we don't like. Life is full of frustrating realities. We can't control timing. We can't avoid every hardship in life. We can't predict the future. The proud person demands that life bend to his will, but the humble person learns to live with what he doesn't like. He learns to trust God's timing and God's purposes. So humility doesn't mean that you pretend to enjoy everything. You don't have to have a Pollyanna outlook on life. And, I love buckling in my seatbelt. And I love driving the speed limit. And I love, It's not that you have to have that Pollyanna idea, but it means that you're surrendering your right to control everything in your life. I do not like to fly. It's not because I care about flying in airplanes. In fact, when I was on the ranch, we had an airplane. It was an experimental plane, and we would take the doors off of it. It was just a little bitty tin plane, and we could take off on the runway at the ranch. It just used gasoline. We would once a year drive down to the gas station with a big tank, and we'd fill it up, and we'd bring that back. It just ran off of regular gasoline. And we could go up in that plane, and we could fly around the ranch, and we could go low and check on the cattle and circle around and look at the water, and we could go up high and get a bird's eye view of the entire 30,000 acres. You almost had to have a plane to be able to explore that land adequately and make sure that everything was working as it should be. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. But I don't like flying commercial. I flew to Kansas earlier this year, and I was on a couple Airbuses and a couple smaller, or at least one smaller flight. And the plane's fine. That's not the problem. But I'm not flying the plane. I'm not landing the plane. I don't get to decide what I'm going to eat and when, or when we're going to stop, or what I'm going to watch or listen to. You say, well, they've got that screen right in front of you. They sure do. And every other person on the plane has a screen, and they're all watching whatever they want to watch. And so you feel like you're stuck there, And so I can't control it. I don't like it. We don't like things that we can't control. Some of us more than others. But when you learn to live with what you don't like, you're learning to rest in God's time and judgment. I think about Joseph in the Old Testament, right? He was sold into slavery by his own family. He was falsely accused. He's thrown in prison. He's forgotten there. And yet he didn't let bitterness rule his heart. In the end, he said, Genesis 50:20, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So you learn to live with what you don't like. And then number 3, you learn to accept what can't be changed. He says, there is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. And there's 4 harsh realities here in verses 8 through 14. Number 1, you can't avoid death. You see that? No one gets to avoid death. The day of your death is out of your hands. There's a comedian who once said, health nuts are going to feel stupid someday lying in a hospital dying of nothing. There are health-conscious people all around you, people who spend more money to buy organic, people who have a workout regimen, people who take all of their vitamins and do everything that they're supposed to do. They eat a disciplined diet, and yet they suffer a heart attack while they're out jogging. What do we learn from that? Eat the donuts, right? No, we can and we should care for our bodies, but there's nothing we can do to be in total control. It's particularly difficult for those in our modern culture to grasp that there could be anything at all that's out of their control, even death. We're a country of control freaks. The whole message of our society is to be independent, to take control of your destiny, control of your future, be your own boss. But God didn't design us that way. During her lifetime, Queen Elizabeth I was considered the most powerful woman on earth. But as she was dying, someone wrote, she said, "It is over. I have come to the end of it, the end, to have only one life and to have done with it, to have lived and loved and triumphed, and now to know it is over. One may defy everything else but this." Nobody can defy death. And we have to accept it. Perhaps you've lost loved ones in your life and you've mourned deeply, but after that period of mourning and loss and grief, we have to go on with our lives. Solomon told us that true humility is realizing that no one has power in the day of death. For Christians, of course, it's not such a bad thing after all to die, right? It is, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. I love that song. It is not death to die, to leave this weary road, to go to dwell with him on high, right? So you can't avoid death in verse 8. Look at verse 9. You can't escape distress. What does verse 9 say? All this I have seen and applied my heart into every work which is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. Solomon says everyone under the sun experiences pain. Everyone gets hurt. The hardest part, though, might be accepting pain that doesn't come from circumstances or pain that doesn't come from our own dumb choices or sinful choices, but pain that's imposed on us by another. In the context of parenting, I think this is particularly applicable, especially if you have adult children. Ruth Bell Graham wrote to hurting parents after her two sons spent some time in open and flagrant rebellion against God. She wrote in her book, Prodigals and Those Who Love Them, she said, "We mothers must take care of the possible and trust God for the impossible. We are to love, affirm, encourage, teach, listen to, care for the physical needs of the family, but we cannot convict of sin. We cannot create hunger and thirst after God. We cannot convert. Those are miracles, and miracles are not our department." I have known some mothers who could do some miracles, but not those miracles. We have to trust God with what we can't control, and that includes the pain that comes into our lives, especially pain that's inflicted by others. So we can't escape distress. What else? And I had these on the screen. I'm not putting them up there. We can't escape distress. Number 3, we see deception and that the wicked are honored. Look at verse 10, chapter 8. "And I saw the wicked buried." So what has happened here? The wicked have come to the end of their life. They're being buried. "Who had come and gone from the place of the holy." That's interesting. Wiersbe writes in verse 10, Solomon reports on a funeral he attended. The deceased was a man who had frequented the temple. That's what it means by the place of the holy. This is a man who was often seen in the temple. He'd received a lot of praise from people, but he had not lived a godly life. He was given a magnificent funeral, an eloquent eulogy, while the truly godly people of the city were ignored and forgotten. You saw the last part of that. They were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. And of course, this happens today too. Evil men who die, and yet they receive honor and praise at their funerals, and they're honored and they're memorialized, and there's roads named after them. But their reward in the afterlife will be exactly what they deserve despite all of that, because God is not mocked. Whatsoever man sows, that will he also reap. And then we see defiance because justice is delayed, verses 11 to 14. It's a very interesting passage here. And fallen humanity sees God's patience as permission, doesn't it? Because judgment doesn't fall instantly. People think they're going to get away with evil. And society today reflects that. Why is it that you go into Walmart and you want to buy some razors or something, and they're all locked up and you have to go find somebody to unlock them for you? There are places in the country where the entire inventory is locked up, and you go and you look at it through, a clear glass thing, and then you have to go get someone to unlock it for you to pick it up. Why is that? Because people think there's no consequences. Solomon says because the sentence is not executed speedily. In other words, the law isn't enforced. The people aren't seeing immediate justice and judgment. The heart of men, Solomon said, is set to do evil. Yet the humble person accepts what can't be changed, that we are not the judge. God's justice might be delayed, but it is never denied. Verse 12, though a sinner do evil 100 times, his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God. David Jeremiah wrote, we don't see God sending the lightning rod upon the neighborhood hedonist. What is hedonism? Living for pleasure, right? Doing whatever feels good. That's the message of our culture and society today. We don't see God sending a lightning bolt down and zapping the neighborhood hedonist, so we assume that he's asleep at the wheel. But he's not. There will be a reckoning for all who have strayed between the cradle and the crypt. There will be a time of reckoning for all sinful humanity. The humble heart refuses to play God. It accepts the delay of justice, the mystery of timing, the sovereignty of God over every circumstance. Think about Jesus when he stood before Pilate. Was there an ounce of truth in any of the accusations that were made against him? He's standing there being accused. He's been horrifically beaten, and yet he didn't argue or demand his rights. 1 Peter 2:23 says he committed himself to him that judges righteously. Committed himself to him that judges righteously. So, number 3, we saw that we should accept what can't be changed. And then number 4, we should enjoy what can't be explained. Verses 14 and 15, there be just men unto whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. There are wicked men to whom it happeneth according to the work of the righteous. Solomon admits that life sometimes feels upside down. The righteous suffer, the wicked prosper. Nothing seems fair in life. But instead of despairing, Solomon said, I commended mirth. He's not advocating hedonism here. He's teaching contentment. He's choosing to enjoy God's good gifts in a confusing world. The humble heart doesn't wait for life to make sense before it rejoices. It enjoys the simple gifts of today, a meal, a friend, a moment of laughter. All of these things are reminders that every good and perfect gift, as it says in James, comes down from the Father of lights. Every good thing is from God's hand. Remember Paul, we saw this morning in Philippians, he's writing from prison. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Joy in adversity is the mark of a humble heart that trusts God even when it can't explain Him. And then number 5, finding what you can't uncover. Verses 16 and 17 here, the end of the chapter. When I applied my heart to know wisdom, to see the business that is done upon the earth, I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. Though a wise man think to know it, yet he shall not be able to find it. Solomon's closing here with a confession. He says, after all this studying, all this striving, all this searching, he says, I can't figure it all out. It's the ultimate mark of humility. He was resting in the mystery of life. Pride says, I can't explain it. If I can't explain it, pride says, I can't trust it. Humility says, even when I can't explain it, I will trust Him. There's always going to be things in life that you can't solve, that you can't explain, that you can't uncover. And the humble person doesn't let that shake their faith in God. Romans chapter 11, verse 33 captures this idea perfectly. Paul writes, oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are His judgments and His ways past finding out. One commentator put it this way, God didn't forget to tell us anything important. There are things that are too great for our comprehension and others that are too dangerous for our grasp. Perhaps we will discover the cure for cancer. Perhaps we will invent a spaceship that can take us to other galaxies, but we will only ever know what God permits us to know. As the guardian of all knowledge, He holds every secret. Our response is to bow in humility and then to look up toward the peak of the mountain and get on with the journey. So when you reach the edge of your understanding, you haven't reached the end of God's wisdom. You just reached the beginning of worship. So there's these 5 marks that form this portrait of a truly humble person. Recognizing what you don't understand and trusting in God's wisdom. Learning to live with what you don't like and submitting to God's timing. Accepting what can't be changed and resting in God's justice, enjoying what can't be explained and rejoicing in His goodness, and finding what you can't uncover and worshiping in His greatness. Humility doesn't demand answers from God. It delights in the God who holds the answers. And all of this points beyond Solomon to someone greater. the one who did live out this kind of humble life. You think about Jesus, he embodied each one of these 5 marks. In a sense, he recognized what he didn't understand. And you say, wait, of course he didn't. Of course he understood. He's God, and that's true. He's fully God, fully man. But in the garden, he prayed to the Father. He says, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. He recognized that what he didn't understand. He lived with what he didn't like, the rejection, the betrayal, the cruelty of men. He accepted what couldn't be changed when he submitted to the Father. He said, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done, thine be done. Found joy in what couldn't be explained as he endured the cross. Paul talked about it as the joy that was set before him. Through his death and his resurrection, he revealed what we can never uncover on our own, the mystery of God's redeeming love, how God made a way for us to be made right with him despite the fact that we're evil, wicked sinners. So when life doesn't make sense, when humility feels impossible, we look to Christ. He trusted the Father perfectly so that we could rest in his perfect work. And that is the heart of humility, resting in the one who holds the answers even when we can't see the answers. Solomon searched for wisdom under the sun, but Christ has brought us as Christians hope beyond the sun. And we look forward to that day when we will live with him in heaven and we will have all of the answers. Well, let's close in prayer tonight. Father, we thank you for your word and how it speaks to our heart even today. We thank you. Sometimes it's hard to draw out all of the things that Solomon is saying here, and doubtless there are many that we've